Now it's like it's a partnership. If you can't put in as much work as we are doing, then I don't see it being successful at all.
Now they need to have a team.
Like, and sometimes they don't. And they could be really good, but talent is not gonna just break you through anymore.
Yeah.
Vanessa Satin, editor-in-chief of XXL. We're here for Inside Track podcast with my co-host Courtney Lowery, and we have our special guest Shari Bryant. He's the co-president of Roc Nation, the label, and we're here to talk a little bit about the hip-hop industry and her illustrious career and whatnot. Courtney, I'm passing it over to you to get started.
Welcome, Shari.
Thank you.
Thank you for stepping in, and thank you for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you've been a pillar for a very long time in this game. Tell us how you got started, because you got started at a very young age.
I got started at a very young age, yes. I started at 16 years old. I feel like the story gets boring, but I'm like, you would think that everyone hasn't heard the story. But I got started at 16 years old. I grew up in Harlem, 1199, and I was fortunate enough to grow up with Damon Dash. He was older than me, obviously, but my mom was friends with him, and I would watch him. He first had Original Flavor, I want to say, and then I would see Jay come around, and this was like very beginning years, right? And Damon would be, 1199 was very community oriented, and so I would, we would see him outside, and then we just started seeing like the growth of Damon Dash like in front of our eyes, growing up in 1199. And long story short, let me skip. One day I asked him, I said, could I intern with you? And I was like, in my last year of high school, I want to say it was the summer before me going to my last year of high school. So I was actually 15, about to be 16. And he said, sure, come down to the office. And that was in 1999. And I started interning then.
Wow.
I started interning in 98, so I know what you mean. It was, right out of high school, and you get an internship, and you just keep working. It never kind of, goes into the next thing and the next thing, and then before you know it, like hip-hop becomes your college experience.
It really was. I went to college, so Damon forced me to stay in school. Damon and my family, I want to say. But once I got into Roc-A-Fella, I knew I was like, this is what I want to do, right? But I had to graduate. So I actually graduated from college while interning.
Where'd you go?
Then working. I went to John Jay College in criminal justice.
And what's your major?
It was government,
and
political science, really. That's kind of like what it was called. But it was in close proximity to the office. So I would go to the office, go to class, then come back to the office. So I did a lot of running around during that time.
Now, we look back now and we see a lot of nostalgia back then. Did you know that you were living in history and that this would become major moments that marked a moment in time?
No way.
No?
I had no idea. I knew that it just was exciting.
Yeah.
I was a fan of music, like I would say during my earlier years before I got there, which was not, I didn't have that many years, right? Because I was started at 16. But I used to watch music videos all day, right? I was so enamored in just music, and it was mainly hip hop and R&B because that's what my mom used to play as I, growing up in the house or in the car. So I was just excited to be a part of what was going on because I didn't realize there was such a business behind it, right? I was just,
it was growing. The business was growing then, right?
The business was growing. But I was just a fan of the videos and watching all the fly outfits, and then going into the office, I'm like, oh, this is how it all works and comes together. So just being a part of that, I didn't realize I was stepping into history at all. Yeah.
It's interesting to see the people you worked with before and now where everyone is now.
Yeah. How
many people stayed in the industry, how big people got, and that you knew them before, what things were like,
Yeah.
That's it.
Like hip hop, G.
Yeah.
I started with Latrice, Manuel, Shaka. I just spent Carlene. So we, Roc-A-Fella was so, it was family oriented.
Yeah, insular,
It was a really small company at the time. And so we gained, we created like a really tight knit bond. And And so Carlene, for instance, because she was the first person I worked with going
Carlene
into
Ballin.
Carlene Ballin. She was, Damon J. and Big's assistant at the time, which was
She was the first line of defense for everybody.
She
That was for the right. I remember for the longest time. Yeah.
Yes. And we just spent some time in London together, so that was great. But yeah, we definitely all still keep in touch. May not be on a day-to-day, but anytime we need something, we're always there for each other, and it's a great, just resource community to have.
So after that, you bounced around. You did Atlantic. You were at different jobs, and you ended up back with Roc Nation in a different capacity, but back with the Roc ultimately. So talk a little bit about what do you do? What's your responsibility right now? What do you run? What's it like? And how is it different compared to the old Roc days?
I would say, so right now I'm the co-president of Roc Nation label. I oversee all the business operations, just from a sense of like staffing, maintaining, overseeing P&L, make sure the business is running. And then also, I'm a marketer at heart. So I've never, in all of my roles, I've never fully left marketing.
Right.
It's really because I think it's so important so just to backtrack a little bit, me and Omar, right, split the role. Omar has been an A&R at heart. I've been a marketer at heart. And I've always seen those two things being like the center of breaking artists. And I always admired what Julie and Craig did at Atlantic. I loved how that, they had that dichotomous role. And so that was the first presentation when I started meeting with Jay and Jay Brown and Dez was I would love to have a dichotomous role. It wasn't about me, right? It wasn't like, I just want to be the president. I want to have this, this power, this title. It was how can we be most effective? And so... Because
then you don't have to have one person who does it all.
Exactly.
You've got just two brains working on it. As long as you can get along with the other brain.
1,000%. And knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses, right? And although I lived in the studio as a marketer, I know that I wasn't the one picking out the producer, the production, and all of those things. And so, I thought it was really important for that dynamic. And so, we really split the role that way, right? A&R is completely Omar. I still sign things if I find something that I'm really passionate about, but Omar oversees that. He oversees the A&Rs, and then really the rest of the business I'm overseeing from a day-to-day.
Can you talk about some of your early successes upon joining Roc label?
Yeah. Okay, so I remember some stories, right? I don't know if this is like what has garnered the most success, but these are stories that just stick in my head.
Absolutely.
So I was at Def Jam during the L.A. Reid era, and he would have this thing called senior staff meetings.
That's right.
And so...
Oh, right, former L.A. Reid employee.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All about
Absolutely,
yeah. But we want to hear your story.
So he would have these things called senior staff meetings, and so after Roc-A-Fella kind of like dismantled, I always tell people I had to take a step backwards to move forward. I went to be Tracy Waple's assistant, and she was running marketing. She was the SVP of marketing at Def Jam at the time, and kind of working under Jay's regime, because Falana was also there as a SVP of marketing. And so I went to be her assistant, and so I was like back in the building trying to prove myself because everybody didn't know what I was doing at Roc-A-Fella. It was kind of like.
Did they think that you were nepotism because of your relationship with Dame and that you had a historical background, or do you feel like you got respect when you deserved it, or did you deal with that at all?
I don't know if they thought nepotism, but I do know I was really young still. And I felt like that worked against me a little bit. It was kind of like, okay, she's young, she looks young, can she really handle this workload? And so I started getting things because Tracy became so busy with a lot of projects. I started getting things by default. I got, which sounds crazy, but I got Nas by default. And I also got Jadakiss.
Wow.
And Jadakiss, I remember it was the Last Kiss album. They were focused on so many big projects. I mean, it was like Mariah, Neo, Jeezy. It was like, that was the day. Def Jam was on fire at that time. And so I started working with Jadakiss. I remember he was saying in the beginning, he said, they gave the intern my project, right? And I wasn't an intern at the time, but that's how he felt. And I was like, okay, I know what I got to do with this one, in my head.
That's right.
And he had no radio hit at the time. We were like, let's just focus on his core audience. Right. I said, if we laser focus on that audience they're going to show up. And I knew the power of Jadakiss. And so me, Steve, and Kendall, they were best of both offices at the time.
Right. We had Steve
did you?
as one of the podcast guests. Yeah.
Yes. We formed this little team in the office. We were in offices with no windows, and this is going to be the one.
Nice.
And so I remember L.A. Reid, because first week Jadakiss had sold 90,000 records, and he's like, where did that come from, And so they brought me up to the senior staff meeting because I wasn't in those meetings at the time.
Yeah, you had to work your way
to
those meetings.
Yes, you had to work your way into those meetings, excuse me. And they was like, you have to take a lap, and everybody was clapping. So I remember that as being one of the moments where I was like, okay, L.A. Reid noticed me. I finally got some, outside of Jay and Damon, I was starting to spread my wings, and I really enjoyed that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's it like now? What is your responsibility now compared to then? Do you enjoy it as much?
I do. I still love it, as crazy as it is.
Because people get jaded, right? And people say you've had and make their way out of it or move on or whatever. We're talking 20 to 25 years for you. Are you still as excited?
I'm still excited because I know that I don't know everything. And I know the business is still evolving, right? So it's like, even from when I started at Roc Nation 5 years ago to now, I'm like, it's changed. I have to think about it differently. And so that, as long as I'm continuing to learn and continue to be challenged, I'm still finding my excitement. It's different in a sense of, before I was just creative focused. I was like, okay, where's the billboards going? What are the photo shoots going to look like? And although I still have my hand in that to some degree, I got to think about money going out, money coming in. Can we spend that much? How do we be wiser?
That's a lot of what the job becomes, right?
That's a lot of what it becomes.
The higher you get it up, it becomes about the money, right?
It becomes about the revenue. It becomes about staff morale, keeping people just energized, Artist relations is still very important. And I like to, I've realized, because I've been in a major label system for a while, and then my first kind of indie label experience was with Todd Moskowitz at Alamo. I love the smaller environments because it gives me a chance to really connect with the artist more. It's harder to do in the bigger companies because there's so much more going on, and we're kind of like a quality over quantity, but we can afford to do that because we're smaller, right? And so I'm able to talk to the artists when they need, I'm still very hands-on in that sense, but it is all about just the vision of the company. Where do we want to see it in the next 5 years? How do we get there? Being more strategic, and just thinking of everything at one time, really. Before it was marketing, you know.
So when you first started, a lot of us, when we first started, there was no streaming, it was CDs, and then, the business evolved. How were you able to change over time, and is your thinking still the same? Do you approach things differently? What is your thought approach when you go into signing artists, when you bring things to market, in a business that keeps changing over time?
It's a balance, I would always say, because the thought process for me is still the same. I still want to break legacy acts, right? And that hasn't changed. How we do it has changed a bit. Before, you didn't have to worry about the overexposure of the internet and the fans or their communities being a part of their everyday lives and needing so much. Now I say that music needs so much more context, right? Because you have to evoke emotion, and it's almost like you have to expose yourself. Before the internet, right? You didn't have to give so much of yourself for people to connect with you, and so it is important to a degree that artists are out there doing the work in a different kind of way. I would say we would be able to manufacture artists a little bit more back then than we can now. Now it's very see-through. And so it's important, especially when signing artists, seeing what they've done up until this point. Because it's like it's a partnership. If you can't put in as much work as we are doing, then I don't see it being successful at all, you know? And so it's really important for us to like make sure that the team that's around the artist is important. You know, before I used to be like, okay, we'll build a team around them. You know,
now they have the team.
Now they need. No, I'm saying now they need to have.
Now they need to have the team.
Like, and sometimes they don't, and they could be really good, but talent is not gonna just break you through anymore. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of other factors, and so I have to think about all of those things before we, you know, bring an artist into the fold.
Absolutely.
Now, do you have a bigger hands up because they have a social following versus when they came in and they didn't have any? How much does having a social following with a new artist, or any artist, I guess, matter? How much do those numbers mean to you guys, or do they hinder?
Having a social following with engagement, right? Because that's also important, right? You can have a bunch of numbers, but it doesn't mean anything. But having a social following engagement definitely helps, because then you know you have a catered audience. You have somebody that's paying attention and showing up. But we've done signings where there wasn't any social following.
Well, so it's interesting because I see a lot more signings lately, and I'll go to the artist and there's less significant followings than ever. And you say, okay, so this is kind of like the mailman got a label deal or something, you know, got a record deal or something. Like it feels more local than ever. Now, is that because everybody's competing to sign the same people, or you're just looking at people earlier on? But why does it seem like it's, you know, more tangible? It's, you know, an artist doesn't have to get as many. It's 40,000 followers versus 140,000 or something.
I don't know. I can't speak to why other labels are doing it. I would say for us, like Maida, for instance, had 10,000 followers. We just thought she was amazing. And we're like, you know, Omar had a vision. He said, I already know what the records are. You know, he had a full vision and she was aligned. And so we did it. I think it still operate. We still operate off of gut and passion to some degree as well. I don't know if that's what other people are looking at when they're signing it, you know, because sometimes there's things on the back end that show you, although they have 40,000 followers, the growth is, you know, 10x in week over week, and they, you know, those are enough metrics to say from a data standpoint that we should sign it. But for us, it has primarily been about, if we love it, you know, we're going to go for it.
So you're still going off your ear?
We're still going off our ear. And vision, you know, if we see something, if we meet somebody and we're like, okay, you have it, you know. And I think that's something that we still bank on.
That's good, because then that means it's not so much manufactured by whatever the system is.
Yeah.
You know, that it's not TikTok driven. It's not social driven like that you're still saying, hey, there's talent here.
Absolutely.
That's what we're signing off of, you know? Do you see social affecting the artists? Like, we just did a story for XXL about, and what we noticed a lot when we were talking to labels is how much social affects the artists, how the comments hurt them, how many labels have had to take over running the social for the artists because it just affects them so drastically one way or the other from seeing it. Is that something you deal with artists where, I mean, people are mean.
Yeah.
They're going to be mean on here. Yeah. They're going to be mean to the artists. And how do you deal with that for the morale of your artists when they're getting torn down?
Yeah. Well, definitely. We see it all the time. It's one of those things that, I mean, as a human being, right, it's just hard to ignore. But that's where I think the artist relations comes into play, and having those relationships where if an artist is bothering them, I mean, if something's bothering an artist, they feel comfortable enough to hit us and be like, you know, they're just in the mood or something. And we try to, because I'm so aware of the effect that has on artists, I try to be proactive in just helping them to understand how great they are, making sure they understand their plan, their long, because anything can happen, right? Somebody could say, I don't know, you haven't been consistent. But as long as they know what they have coming up, or, you know, things like that, I think it changes their perception. Yes, and we believe in them. Yeah. And so, it definitely happens, but we definitely try to...
I mean, it's something you had to fight different than the Jadakiss project, right?
Absolutely.
You know, versus what you came up on and dealing with that.
Absolutely.
And now a whole other level of your job in the business is dealing with people's feelings on a day-to-day basis you didn't have to do before, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like artist relations is a lost art? Do you feel like, do major labels, do you feel they focus on it more, or do you feel independents focus on it more, or is it something you guys have to be ready by the time you get to us because we're already off the races?
I've been out of the major label system for so long, but I do know that there are major labels that are still operated off of people that strongly believe in that, like Julie and Craig, right? That's where they come from. So I can't see, although I'm not in that system, I can't see if Cardi has an issue, not being able to reach out to them or, having that direct communication. But I do think it's an important art. I think it's very important because if you don't know your artist, then how could you really devise the right plan? How can you reach the right people, right? Because you're just shooting in the dark then. And I think that's where, the business has gone a little bit, the shooting in the dark and not having enough strategy and understanding who the artist is speaking to and taking enough time to build that community, And
how critical is that in the developmental phase? When an artist first comes in?
Which part? The
artist relations part.
Oh, it's super important because it's kind of like a baby, right? You're molding, you're helping to mold how they're going to perceive things and how they're going to show up. And so I think it's really important to be there in the beginning. But you also got to stay because they evolve over time and they're going to see different things. They're going to be around different people. And so you have to keep them grounded in a sense. And just constantly reminding them of who they're showing up for. Because I think what happens with artists sometimes is they start seeing more and then they want to speak to the world at one time. And I'm like, let's focus on the community because if you keep focusing on your core, that's gonna grow you regardless.
You're gonna build a core, right?
Yes. Yeah. And people are gonna want to. And Jay is the blueprint of that. I always talk about how like Jay didn't go to Linkin Park. Linkin Park came to him, right? Like it was just the culture he had on such a lock that people wanted to be a part of what he had going on. Yeah. And so I always think about. I always try to preach that to our artists. And then I wanted to just address one thing because we were talking about just going off of gut and being able to do that. That's a big part of having an artist that really modeled his career off of that.
Right.
I think that's why we have the autonomy to operate that way, where we can sign things that we really believe in, and he understands the time it takes to build a superstar, right? Because he was in a position himself. It's harder when you haven't been in that position.
Right. So how much is Jay part of Roc Nation on a daily basis, on a weekly, on a who's signed to the roster, what's going on? Do you report back? What's his actual touch on the label?
We bring him in when we're super excited about something. We have a song that we're like, Jay, you got to hear this. But he's very, very high level, right? He's overseeing not only Roc Nation label, but not overseeing it. He's over the entire company as a chairman, where he has his Carter Enterprises, he has management, he has sports, so I try to not inundate him with things. He'll hit us every now and then and just ask how things are going. And then we do like quarterly meetings where we just update him. But he puts a lot of trust in us.
Does everybody try to get to him through you?
People have tried. I think I've created such a, don't even come to me about that, please. Where enough people know now. And what's great is that the level of autonomy that they've given us, the artists don't really, that's not their angle.
They're not waiting for him to come in the building.
They're not waiting because we can make the decisions, and they know if we say no, we're saying no, right?
But you signed to Roc Nation, the label, you are getting the Jay-Z cosign, right?
You're getting the cosign through being on Roc Nation,
right?
Right? You're getting the cosign because Roc Nation is the name that you're signing to, but that doesn't come automatically with, okay, now Jay has to put his arm around you or anything
give you a guest first.
Yeah. Right, yes. But the name has meaning.
Right. How upset were you to see the split of Dame and Jay as being someone who was there for the beginning and where it is now?
Yeah. It was a lot. It was upsetting because it was just Damon I grew up with. Jay, essentially still grew up in a sense because I started at 16. So it was disheartening to see it happen because we were such a family-oriented,
it worked.
Team. Huh?
It worked.
It worked.
Felt like it was all working.
Worked.
Yeah.
And it was sad to see. But it was, it was something that it was a lesson, I think, for me as well. Like, okay, it's hard, as much as you love what you do, you always have to remember it's a business at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. I think that was the biggest lesson in it all.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of that. I mean, you see that a lot of times, either with you personally in something you're involved in, or other things in similar situations, that it is a business.
Yes.
And it can't stay like something forever or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's one of the takeaways that you'll always remember that Jay, he's giving you a gem?
I would love to sound super prolific here, right? But I can't remember.
I live by this line he gave me, right? I say it's my mantra,
I can't remember one, but what he has given me, and I really want to say, I have to give credit to Jay, Damon, and Biggs,
right.
But Jay also being now where I'm currently, I'm currently with him. What they have consistently given me is the strength to step in these rooms and be confident in who I am, right? And be confident that I deserve this, because they pour into me. They've poured into me. They've given me, let me not say give me, because I've earned it too, right?
Correct.
I've definitely earned it. But to trust me, I should say,
there you go.
with this level of position.
Well, they were the first to believe in you, right?
They were the first to believe in me at 16, right? Damon used to force me into meetings with Def Jam and say, "You're running the meeting," and I'm shaking, like literally shaking, because I'm like, "What? All of these people, and it forced me to just operate in those rooms. And then for Jay now, it's kind of like, even if someone tried to come to him, he's reverting it back to me and Omar, right? There's no it's not playing two sides of the fence, and so that encouragement does a lot.
Yeah.
It does a lot for me outside of Roc Nation, when I have to go into different boardrooms or, talk to people that maybe I've even looked up to over the years, but have to have hard conversations because it's business.
Right.
It just gives you a different level of encouragement to keep going.
Sure.
All right, so are there any particular moments that you were around historically that you can't believe you were there for? A song, a performance, an argument, what have been some great things that, are in your...
Yeah.
If you just to flex for a minute, flex on us for a little things that we didn't get to be around, but you did.
She's like,
Sherry's very humble.
Like, it's so many.
I'm like,
There's so many, but I also don't want to brag because I don't think that's her, right?
So
It's
many.
a mix of the two.
When have I been around? I know it's been so many, right? And I haven't, Summer Jam, Michael Jackson coming out and being backstage for that moment, and seeing that. I remember that moment because right after, this is like a random memory, but right after Carlene lost like Jay's diamond chain or bracelet, and he was like, "Come on, she's not," because she was like, "Okay, let me go find it," and he was like, "Let's just go, she's not coming back." But I remember that. I don't know why I randomly remember that, but that was a cool moment. I'm like at a loss. I've seen Cam, Dipset, we had that whole moment that I was like there. I was like the fifth member or sixth. How many was it?
I do remember you very much for the Dipset.
Yeah, I was all in that. We had great moments.
Yeah, you were the fifth member.
I was everywhere with them, everywhere. I'm just trying to think of
all right, what about starstruck moments for you that you were just excited to be around, even if it's outside of hip hop? Via your career, what have been things that you were just starstruck to meet this person or see this person, or because you're allowed into rooms that most people aren't allowed into, and not just rooms, venues, backstage, whatever it is, but have there been moments where you were just speechless?
Okay, so this is going to sound crazy, but so there was a gap between when I last seen Jay and what Jay had become, right, before I started interning. And I was a Jay-Z fan, right? And so once I started at Roc-A-Fella, I was like really excited to be around Jay. So when I first seen him, I was a little stuck. But other than that, because I was around, to me, I felt like I was around the coolest of cool, you know? So it was really hard to be starstruck after that, because we were like, I loved everything about how Roc-A-Fella operated. I loved how we moved, you know, and then we would see so many different people just because of who Jay was, you know, being on his video sets or just being at shows. He had Jay-Z and friends, you know, so I don't know. I didn't.
So she was around for everything.
Yeah. Too many to remember.
Yeah. I know I'm going to leave here and I'm going to be like, dang, I should have said this moment, right? But nothing's coming to me immediately. I mean, Nas, when I started working with Nas, I thought that was really cool. I was really excited about that. I wasn't starstruck, but I was really excited to work with him.
Yeah.
And Nas was one, because he was already so legendary when I started working with him, the level of humbleness, like he was so humble and he was so appreciative. And I was like, wow, this, you know, like it just, it shocked me. And I remember when Tracy left Def Jam, he called L.A. Reid and told him I was the only person that he wanted to work my project. So that was another moment where people started like, okay, I got to pay attention to what this girl is doing, because too many people that have a voice and have some power are like calling her out, you know? But yeah.
So looking at today's landscape, I mean, you're mentioning big names, Nas, Jay. These are huge artists. We were talking about this a little before podcast. What does it take to be a rap star these days, to be a music star? You know, are we going to see them be as big as those guys are? Are we going to see legacy acts like that? It seems like it's very, and something you might deal with your job and your label is here today, gone tomorrow. How can you have somebody stick around? Is that even possible? What's a modern day hip hop star? How do you approach all of that?
I think it's possible. I know it's a lot harder today because, you know, the business is it's just so many people. It's so oversaturated. So it's harder to break through. But I do think, and I think it takes longer. And I think it's all about resilience. And you can't be afraid. Like, a lot of artists, they feel like they're being redundant. They feel like I already did that. I'm like, no, you have to do that a lot more to capture your core audience. I think it's really, really all about building community, building a fan base, and you have to speak to people over and over and over again. And you have to have a point of view. You have to know who you're talking to. I always like challenge an artist. Who are you? What does the fan look like? What's the person's name? What are they wearing, right? Don't try to speak to a bunch of people at one time. Identify your audience, identify your fan, and really capture that person. And I say build there. Do every artist want to listen to that? No. They feel like we're pigeonholing them. And I always say that that's not the case. We just want you to have a foundation. A foundation to build from, but a foundation you can always fall back on. Right. Like, you look at these R&B artists that can tour forever, right? Because they didn't change their point of view. They still talking about lovemaking, sex, and, you know, and that's what people want to hear. That's what they're showing up for. And I always say, I want you to succeed beyond me. It shouldn't be contingent on a plan that we have to put together. Right. It has to be contingent on, no, your audience is going to
make us change the plan.
Yes, exactly. And so I do think that there's still room for superstar growth. And I want to see, and I'm actually very laser focused on seeing superstars grow. But it has to be, like, you have to have the runway. And that comes from up top too, right? You have to have the runway. Executives, owners of the corporation, they have to understand that it's not an overnight process. Right. But we think about catalog, we think about major labels, we think about what keeps the lights on in buildings, right? 75% of the business is catalog driven. If we don't continue to build sustainable artists, what's going to cover the catalog ongoing, you know? And so I think that's really, I think it's important for our business.
In your opinion, are stars made or built?
Or built or born?
Built or born.
Built or born. I think you can have it in you.
You could be born with something special, but it's got to be built around.
But it has to be built around. It has to be nurtured.
Yeah.
You have to be serious about it. Maybe the answer is both, right? Like, you're born with it, but you have to
cultivate it.
You have to cultivate it.
And we've seen talented people get in their own way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I see people with less talent,
There
sometimes
you go.
no talent.
That's what I was getting at right there, because we've seen a lot of people that, you know, may not be as talented musically as others, but their trajectory is much further.
Making a lot more money than you, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Hard work beats talent.
There you
talent
go.
What about ego? Like when we do freshmen, we see more and more, we sit with new artists and they say, I'm doing something nobody else has done before. And you're like, oh, we've seen it.
Right.
You know, like have you ever seen this before? No one's ever done that before. I'm the only one to ever do this before. And you're like, I've been around a long time. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of this before. Mm-hmm. Do you feel more ego than ever? Is that just healthy? What's the challenge?
I don't feel more ego than ever. I feel like I've seen ego.
You've seen it the same amount?
Yeah. And maybe it's more at one time, but I've seen the highest of egos, you know? So I don't look at artists like, and I also sometimes, I think I have more grace for artists, especially young artists, because they're speaking on what they know. Mm-hmm. They don't, you know, and sometimes they haven't done the research to know that someone did it before them. And so, you know, you use those as teachable moments, but I don't ever turn my nose at them. You know, have an ego, but work hard, you know, because sometimes you need the ego. You know what Jay say? Sometimes you need a little ego. Like, I think that is important, especially in the positions they're in. They have to think of themselves as this like major figure, but have the work ethic to back it up. Yeah. That's my thing. Traditionally,
You know, Roc is known for as a hip hop label, but it's much more than that. You guys have R&B acts. Mm-hmm. You guys are global. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that.
Yes, I'm glad you asked me that question because I think everyone thinks immediately like it's, you know, a rap label.
Yeah, it's much more than that.
It's much more than that. We had Willow, right, who was an alternative rock. We actually kind of like took the time to just work with her over the course of her figuring out who she wanted to be, you know, where she was most comfortable. But we have alternative R&B, we have Ombre, we have traditional R&B, Dixon, we have Rhapsody, and then we also have rock. Like we have this artist, Dorothy, that's amazing, that we're super excited about. So we're definitely an all genre based label.
And the management side of Roc is a whole different company.
It's a whole different thing.
So you're sisters, but from a distance.
Correct. Yes. Completely separate vertical. But the same for management. Like, you know, people hear about the Megans, the Uzis, Big Sean's, but we have a Roc management division. So we're multifaceted. We're not into just one thing. And that's something that we were very intentional about. It's not just about the genre. To me, it's more about the authenticity of the artist, right? Yeah. Like, are you evoking emotion? How can people connect with you? And if you have that, that's our metric to getting into our door, right? It's not about you having to be a rap or hip hop artist.
Gotcha.
Last question for you. What are you excited about? Generic, but
from our
forward thinking.
What I'm working
anywhere
on?
You want to. Buying a house next week. Anything that you're excited about overall. What is Shari excited about?
What am I excited about? I'm definitely excited. So, I started at Roc Nation in 2019. The goal was to just make sure we were able to create the new generation of what the label was, right? Because I didn't want to rest on the success of J. Cole and Rihanna. I'm like, that's cool, but what are we doing, right? What are we bringing to it? How are we adding value to the name? And so we signed some things that, Maida, Ombre, Kaylin.
You got Ken now, right?
We have Ken the Man.
I like Ken a lot,
Ken the Man, who I'm so excited about. And then, just also maximizing the things that were already there, like the Rhapsody, who's having a great moment right now. And she's just amazing. I always have to say that because she is such a pleasure to work with.
She's dope.
But I'm excited we're getting over the hump now, like people are starting to call us. We're getting more inbound. We're seeing the numbers grow. And so I'm really excited to just see all of our hard work come to fruition, because it's almost like we've been quiet for 5 years, but we haven't. We've been working behind the curtain for a really long time, and so I'm excited that people are actually starting to notice the things that we have going on.
And you touched on it before, but it definitely isn't an overnight process.
At all.
And the mere fact that you just stated that, you started in 2019 and you guys were to represent what the new face is to become, So congratulations in taking that step forward. So
Thank you.
Other than that,
Thank you for joining us on the
Thank you for
podcast and giving us a chance to
having me.
talk to you.
Of
It was
course.
a pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you for checking in an episode with XXL's Inside Track. We'll see you on the next one.